The Book of Enoch, a text that has captivated scholars and spiritual seekers alike, opens a window into a world long lost to time. It takes us back to an era when celestial beings known as the Watchers were entrusted with an important mission, to observe and guide humanity. But their journey, filled with promise and purpose, would soon take a dramatic turn. If you're interested in this topic and want to learn more, make sure to hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss out on future videos that will definitely surprise you. The Watchers were not just ordinary beings. They were once exalted entities in the divine realm, honored for their wisdom and their closeness to the Creator. According to the ancient texts, they were assigned to oversee the earth and ensure that the newly created humans flourished. They stood as guardians, ensuring the harmony between the heavens and the earth. They were the eyes of the divine, a link between the celestial and the mortal. But what exactly were the Watchers? In many ways, they were angelic figures, pure and powerful, yet capable of great emotion and decision-making. They were entrusted with the responsibility of ensuring the balance of creation, given the task to observe and protect those under their care. The term Watcher itself speaks to this role, those who stand vigilant, whose every action was meant to be in service of a greater purpose. The origins of the Watchers are shrouded in mystery. They were not created out of thin air but were forged from a divine will that sought to understand and oversee the complexities of the human experience. They were beings of immense power, each with unique abilities and characteristics that made them fit for their task. These beings were known to be not just observers but also mentors to humanity, offering guidance in ways that were meant to nurture and protect the early generations of humans. The Book of Enoch describes how the Watchers came from a place far beyond the reaches of our world. Some believed they were sent by the Creator as guardians, while others thought they were part of a celestial plan that existed before the creation of mankind. The ancient narrative gives little away, but it hints at a deep bond between the Watchers and the earth, one that transcended the physical realms and touched upon something far more profound. As the Watchers watched, they saw the human race grow and evolve. They observed the creation of civilizations, the rise of kings, and the slow but steady march of time. Their mission was not one of domination, but one of care and understanding. They were tasked with guiding humanity through the early days, ensuring that the spark of creation would burn brightly on Earth. Yet, as time passed, their perspective on humanity began to change. They saw potential in humans, a spark of greatness that could be nurtured. But they also saw the fragility of humanity, its vulnerability to temptation, sin, and the forces of darkness. This internal conflict began to brew in the hearts of the Watchers. Were they merely to observe, or should they act? Should they intervene in the fate of humanity, or were they bound by their divine mandate to remain passive? The tension between duty and desire grew within them. And thus the story of the Watchers truly begins, not in their heavenly home, but here on earth, where their choices would shape the course of history. But what would those choices be? And how would the Watchers navigate the fine line between their responsibilities and their growing curiosity about the human race? The Watchers, originally entrusted with the sacred task of observing humanity, found themselves in an existential dilemma. As time passed and their bond with the earth deepened, their perspective began to shift. What had once been a simple observation turned into a more intimate connection with humanity. The Watchers began to see the potential in humans, not just for greatness, but also for chaos, confusion, and suffering. This shift marked the beginning of a new chapter for the Watchers, one that would change their destiny forever. The key turning point came when the Watchers began to question their role. Were they simply to stand by and watch as humanity stumbled through its early days, or were they meant to intervene, to offer their wisdom and perhaps even alter the course of human development? This internal struggle within the Watchers was not a small matter. It was a profound conflict that would ultimately lead them to a decision that went against their divine mandate. Some of the Watchers, inspired by the beauty of the world they observed, began to question whether their role as passive observers was truly enough. The first seeds of rebellion were sown in their hearts. They saw humans struggling, caught in cycles of hardship and suffering, and they wanted to help them, truly help them. They began to yearn to share their wisdom, their knowledge, and their power with humanity. But as their longing grew, so did their discontent with the heavenly laws that governed their existence. The rules were clear: watch, observe, but do not interfere. The Watchers had been created to serve as the eyes of the divine, but they had never been meant to be hands-on, active participants in the human experience. This divine command, though given with the best of intentions, began to feel like a shackle for the Watchers. What they didn't expect was the strength of their desires. Slowly, the temptation to break their celestial boundaries became unbearable. It was not just curiosity that drove them, it was empathy. They saw the pain, the struggle, and the potential of humanity, and they felt compelled to act. The pull of the mortal world, its allure of freedom, was too strong to resist. And so, the Watchers made the fateful decision to descend to Earth, breaking their divine vow. But the descent was not without its consequences. As they descended, they were no longer just observers. They became participants in the world of humans. They mingled with humanity, shared their knowledge, and gave the people skills and secrets that were never meant for mortal minds. They shared wisdom of the heavens, knowledge that was far too advanced for humanity to comprehend at that time. It was in this very act of descent that the Watchers crossed the line between guardians and fallen beings. They no longer stood as divine witnesses to humanity's journey, they had become active agents in its story. And as they shared their gifts, they unknowingly set in motion a series of events that would alter the course of human history forever. The seeds of rebellion had been sown, and now, the consequences of their actions would begin to take shape. As the Watchers descended to Earth, their intentions were not malicious. They sought to guide and empower humanity, believing that the knowledge they possessed could help the human race thrive. But their decision to share this wisdom with the mortals would have unforeseen consequences. The knowledge they imparted was not just earthly wisdom or practical skills. The Watchers shared secrets that went beyond the realm of human understanding, knowledge of the heavens, of the stars, of the very fabric of creation itself. They taught the people how to work metal, how to understand the mysteries of the cosmos, and even how to tap into forces that were meant to remain hidden from mortal eyes. This knowledge, though powerful, was not meant for humans. It was the kind of wisdom that had the potential to elevate humanity to unimaginable heights, but also to bring about great destruction. The Watchers, in their desire to help, unknowingly unleashed forces that would prove to be too powerful for the humans to control. The forbidden knowledge they shared sparked a chain reaction that led to the creation of the Nephilim, the giants. The Nephilim were the result of the union between the Watchers and mortal women, a crossing of the celestial and earthly realms. These giants were born of divine knowledge and human flesh, creatures of immense size and strength, but also great instability. They were not entirely of the mortal world, yet they were not fully divine either. They were beings caught between two worlds, and their existence represented the dangers of meddling with knowledge that was not meant for humanity. As the Nephilim grew, so did their influence. Their power and strength terrified the human population. They were giants not only in stature, but in ambition. They began to rule over the people, imposing their will on the weak and demanding worship as if they were gods. The mortals, powerless against these monstrous beings, had no choice but to comply with their commands. The Watchers, who had once desired only to help, now found themselves in a moral dilemma. They had sought to empower humanity, but instead, they had created monsters that threatened to undo the very fabric of the world they had sought to protect. The Watchers were confronted with the devastating realization that their intervention had not only disrupted the natural order, but had also given rise to beings who were far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. This is where the story of the Watchers and their forbidden knowledge takes on a deeper, more emotional meaning. The Watchers had acted out of a genuine desire to help humanity, but in doing so, they had made an irreversible mistake. They had shared knowledge that was beyond their understanding, and the consequences of that knowledge were now all too clear. The giants, the Nephilim, were not just a physical threat, they were a symbol of the dangers of overstepping the boundaries set by the divine. The fall of the Watchers was not just a fall from grace, it was a fall from innocence. They had once been pure, filled with noble intentions, but their actions had set in motion a chain of events that could not be undone. The giants they had created were a living reminder of the cost of forbidden knowledge, a cost that the Watchers would have to live with for eternity. The Watchers, once powerful celestial beings tasked with the sacred duty of observing humanity, now faced the consequences of their choices. As they watched the unfolding chaos caused by their descent to Earth, they could not escape the weight of their actions. The forbidden knowledge they had shared with humanity had resulted in the creation of the Nephilim, giants who were wreaking havoc on the mortal world. The Watchers had intervened with the best of intentions, but their actions had unleashed a force that threatened to overwhelm both humanity and the divine order. As they witnessed the devastation caused by the giants, the Watchers found themselves locked in a deep internal conflict. They had wanted to help, to empower humanity and guide them to greatness, but in doing so, they had created monsters. The very beings they had hoped would bring wisdom and strength to humanity had instead become tyrants, ruling with cruelty and fear. The Watchers were forced to confront the terrible truth. Their decision to descend to Earth had not only disrupted the natural order, but it also brought suffering to the very beings they had meant to protect. The Watchers' struggle was not just a battle with the consequences of their actions, but also with their own guilt and regret. They had been created to serve a higher purpose, to act as guardians and guides, not as active participants in the fate of humanity. But their desire to intervene, to share their knowledge and wisdom, had come at a high cost. Now, they were left to wrestle with the emotional burden of their choices. They had crossed a line, and they could never go back. For many of the Watchers, this internal struggle was the most painful part of their fall. They had once been pure, their hearts filled with the divine light of their Creator. But now, they found themselves consumed by remorse and self-doubt. The desire to protect humanity, to make a difference, had led them to betray the very laws they had sworn to uphold. Their fall from grace was not just a physical one, it was a spiritual and emotional descent into darkness. Some of the Watchers, tormented by their guilt, tried to undo their actions. They sought ways to contain the damage, to stop the Nephilim from spreading their reign of terror. But it was too late. The giants had already grown too powerful, and the damage had been done. The Watchers, once proud and exalted beings, now found themselves powerless to correct the consequences of their actions. Their attempt to reverse their mistake was met with failure, and they were left to watch helplessly as the world they had once sought to protect crumbled around them. But the struggle of the Watchers was not over. In their hearts, they still held the desire for redemption. They had made a mistake, a grave one, but they were not beyond salvation. The Watchers began to understand that their journey was not just about the knowledge they had shared with humanity, but about the lessons they could learn from their fall. Their struggle was one of repentance, of trying to find a way to atone for the damage they had caused. The emotional turmoil of the Watchers was far from over. They had descended to Earth with noble intentions, but now, they were trapped in a cycle of regret and despair. Their fall was not just a momentary lapse in judgment, it was a journey of self-discovery and perhaps, eventual redemption. The emotional climax of the Watchers' story arrives with the arrival of the divine judgment. As the Watchers had feared, their actions had not gone unnoticed by the higher powers. Their descent to Earth, their gift of forbidden knowledge, and the creation of the Nephilim had disrupted the cosmic balance in ways that could not be ignored. The celestial beings, whose task it was to maintain order and harmony, saw that the Watchers had crossed a line. The consequences of their decisions would now be reckoned with. The heavenly council convened, and the Watchers found themselves summoned to face their fate. The angels, beings of immeasurable power and wisdom, looked upon the fallen Watchers with disappointment and sorrow. The divine light that had once surrounded them now seemed distant and cold, as though the very essence of their being had been tainted. The Watchers were no longer revered entities but had become outcasts, their actions a stain upon the heavenly realm. In the presence of the divine council, the Watchers were confronted with the full weight of their choices. They were accused of betrayal, not just of the laws of the heavens, but of the trust placed in them by the Creator. They had been given the responsibility to watch over humanity, to guide and protect them, but instead, they had chosen to act on their own desires. The judgment was swift and harsh. The Watchers were to be bound and cast into the abyss, their freedom forever taken away as punishment for their transgressions. The binding of the Watchers was not a simple act of punishment, it was a cosmic sentence that carried profound emotional weight. The Watchers, who had once been free and powerful, now found themselves shackled, bound by chains that represented the ultimate consequence of their fall. They had crossed a line that could never be undone, and now they were left to face the isolation of their eternal punishment. The once vibrant beings who had looked upon humanity with hope and compassion now stood in darkness, their light dimmed by the judgment they had earned. The emotional pain of the Watchers was palpable. They had been exiled from their celestial home, their mission and purpose reduced to a tragic memory. Their fall had not only cost them their freedom but had also stripped them of their identity. They were no longer the Watchers, the guardians of humanity. They were fallen, broken beings, condemned to a fate that could never be reversed. As the chains were locked around them, the Watchers were left to reflect on their choices. They had once been filled with pride and purpose, but now they were consumed by regret. Their dreams of guiding humanity, of imparting wisdom, had been shattered by their own actions. They had tried to help, to make the world a better place, but in doing so, they had unknowingly set in motion a series of events that had brought about destruction and chaos. Now they had to face the consequences, knowing that no matter how much they regretted their actions, the punishment would remain. The judgment of the Watchers serves as a powerful reminder of the cost of overstepping boundaries and the consequences of acting without considering the greater good. It is a tale of redemption lost, a story of how even the most well-intentioned actions can lead to irreversible outcomes. The Watchers were no longer the benevolent guardians they had once been. They were now the fallen, bound by their own choices. The story of the Watchers is not just one of cosmic rebellion and divine punishment. It is a profound lesson about the complexity of good intentions, the consequences of actions, and the importance of knowing one's place within the grand design of the universe. As the Watchers stand bound in their eternal prison, their tale is far from over. It is a story that resonates with us today, offering insights into our own struggles with temptation, responsibility, and the balance between knowledge and wisdom. The first and most significant lesson from the Watchers' fall is the danger of overstepping one's boundaries. The Watchers were created for a specific purpose, one that involved observing and guiding humanity from a distance. Yet, in their desire to be more involved, they sought to intervene in ways that were never meant for them. Their actions remind us that sometimes, even when our intentions are pure, stepping outside the role that has been assigned to us can have unforeseen and often irreversible consequences. There is a reason certain boundaries exist, and breaking them can lead to chaos, no matter how noble the cause. Another lesson from the Watchers' story is the importance of self-awareness and humility. The Watchers were beings of immense power, yet they failed to recognize the limits of their influence. They believed that their knowledge and wisdom were enough to change the course of human history, but they did not account for the complexity of the human heart and the unforeseen consequences of their actions. In our own lives, we must recognize that even our best intentions can go awry, and we must remain humble in the face of challenges and decisions that carry far-reaching impacts. Self-awareness allows us to stay grounded, to recognize our limits, and to avoid overestimating our control over situations. The Watchers also teach us about the importance of responsibility. Their actions were driven by a desire to help humanity, but they failed to consider the full scope of their responsibility. They did not foresee the harm that would come from the knowledge they shared or the giants they created. In many ways, this reflects the dangers of taking on too much responsibility without fully understanding the consequences. We must approach our responsibilities with care, thinking not only of the immediate benefits but also of the long-term effects that may unfold from our decisions. Perhaps the most inspiring lesson of the Watchers' tale is one of redemption. Though their fall from grace was severe, and their punishment eternal, there remains a flicker of hope within their story. The Watchers, in their remorse, may have learned that redemption is not always about undoing the past, but about accepting responsibility and striving to be better. The emotional journey of the Watchers, filled with regret, guilt, and a desire for redemption, mirrors the struggles many of us face when we make mistakes. The Watcher's tale teaches us that redemption is not always about escaping consequences, but learning from our actions and moving forward with greater wisdom and humility. The Watcher's story serves as a powerful reminder that even in our darkest moments, there is always the potential for growth and self-reflection. While their fate was sealed, their fall from grace did not erase the lessons they learned from their experience. Just as the Watchers were given the responsibility of guiding humanity, we too are entrusted with the power to shape the world around us. It is up to us to be mindful of the knowledge we seek, the actions we take, and the impact we have on the lives of others.